Welcome to the new For Purpose CEO podcast.
I'm Michelle.
I am Danielle, and we are here to talk about being a CEO in the for-purpose sector. Each episode, we will talk about issues not-for-profit and for-purpose CEOs need to manage based on our 30-plus years of experience. It will be an honest discussion of the highs and the lows, helping you tackle the unique challenges of running a NFP.
Leading can be challenging and sometimes lonely. We get it. Join us and our guests weekly for an honest discussion about running a for-purpose organisation. We will be sharing practical tips, shared experiences and real-world stories to help you tackle the unique challenges of running a for-purpose organisation.
Right, so today we're actually going to talk about how you show up in a board meeting. And obviously part of that will be preparing for it, but it's really understanding that you as the CEO are expected to turn up to board meetings, you'll present to board meetings, and I think it's how do you get to that point and how do you act when you're in the board meeting. I think it's quite a big topic. I think there's quite a lot to unpack in it, and I think there's quite a lot of factors which are within your control to do, and then there's a lot which are just not, right? Like you can't control, for example, the culture of the board. You might be able to influence it somewhat, but that's not something within your control.
And it's a slightly different dynamic as well, because as the CEO in a for-purpose business, when you're in the business and you're with your team, you're the leader. But when you go into a boardroom as the CEO, that dynamic changes and there's a different element to your role.
Absolutely. And you're not in charge. This is not your meeting. This is not your meeting with your team. I mean, you may be on the board. Obviously, some CEOs are on the board, but most are not. And that's that real check of actually, this is someone else's meeting. I'm obviously key to it. I obviously provide a whole lot of the information and very much will influence it, but it's actually not your meeting.
And you don't have control, albeit you might have some influence. You don't have control over the culture and you may have some influence into its functioning, but you don't have ownership over the way it functions either. It's its own unique experience, I think.
You're probably in there and it looks like you're an equal and you might participate most of the time like an equal, but you're not an equal. And I think it's unlikely you are going to rock in the room cold. Like hopefully you have been in board meetings before, whether it's as a CEO or not. But if you're rocking up and it's your first or still, I'd say within the first 6 months of going into this particular board, you really need to work out how does this board operate? Like what are particular board members interested in? Do they have particular focus that they're going to jump at? Are they very detail oriented? Do they just want big picture? Like how does the board operate? Because that's going to really shape how you contribute. Like how do you discuss things?
That's a good point, because the board operates as a group, but the board is made up of individuals.
Yeah. And then they're going to have their own focus, whatever, their own interests.
And you as a CEO obviously also have your own bend. So, if you're a first-time CEO, again, hopefully not the first time you're in a boardroom, but it will be the first time you walk into a boardroom as the CEO with all eyes on you. So knowing the individuals and understanding them and observing them as individuals, but also then understanding how the group operates, how the board functions as a group. Are they cohesive? Are they adversarial? Do they have very clear decision-making rules?
But how do discussions go as well? So one thing that I always think is very interesting is boards might say the papers are taken as read. Now, what that means in different boardrooms is actually quite different. So some of them might say, okay, it's read, but could you, CEO, just give a quick summary? And so you have to know that actually you're expected to do 2 or 3 high-level bullet points, or are they actually asking for a bit of a summary? Like what is the discussion normally like? As the papers taken as read is do not repeat to me a word of what you've said because we actually now just want to make the decisions that you've asked for us? Or like what is the discussion normally in the boardroom? Do they get summaries? Do they take it as read? Do they actually want to have a bit of a chit chat around each topic or paper to make sure that everyone's on board? Like that will be completely different in different boards.
And it's unique to the CEO because if you do have a board who wants either a presentation or they want a summary, you almost have to interpret that need not from as a CEO, I'm going to, do this grand presentation, but in that moment, you have to understand what is important for the board in order for the board to be able to progress to some kind of action, if that is what is actually requested as part of that paper. And you have to almost look at it through the lens of a board, not through the lens of a CEO. You might be writing or you may have contributed or you're reviewing that paper through the lens of a CEO to go to a board, but then in that moment, you've also got to be looking at it through the lens of a board.
And I don't think most boards want the CEO to do a presentation unless it's something new, like a new proposal, a new program. But I think mostly they're looking for a discussion. In particular, if you've written a paper or there's information in your board report, they don't need to be presented to. They want to have a discussion around what are the risks, what are the benefits, where do you think we might not be adequately resourced, or what else do we need to bring in? So I don't feel that it would be normal for the CEO to present. It would be normal for the CEO to be informing the discussion.
Oh, that's interesting, because I have been in board meetings where the board has wanted presentations.
Yeah, I think if it's new, but not every month, right? Not.
No, definitely no, because you might as well write a report.
Well, yeah. So if it's new or there's like a business case to be presented because you want to do something new or new, I think yes, because that is a little presentation will then lead to the discussion. But I think if something's happened or sector development or part of the course or decision has to be made, I see that more as a discussion rather than a presentation.
Right, yeah. No, I understand. If it's just part of normal not every day, but normal board cycling, then no, that would be a discussion. Or some boards don't even leave it up for the CEO for discussion. They might actually just go straight to the board with, do you have any questions? It's taken as read, are there any questions? And so as a CEO, you have to anticipate what are those questions, because if you've presented that paper or that report, then you need to be able to anticipate the kinds of questions that a board is going to actually ask so that you can, first, you need to know your stuff, obviously, to be able to present the answers.
Always helps.
Always helps.
Always helps. Know your stuff I think it's a good life motto, really. Know your stuff.
Yeah, I was just going to say that idea of knowing your stuff, or if your board puts it straight to questions. I've been in board meetings where that particular chair wants to run a really tight, efficient board meeting, so they don't want to repeat what's already in the board papers. They go straight to questions. But somebody once told me, probably about a year ago or maybe 18 months ago, particularly as AI was blowing up, particularly large language models was blowing up, that they knew a director who pushed the papers through AI to be able to get...
What, for a summary or something?
One, to get a summary, and then two, what questions should I ask based upon what's been provided?
Right.
And
interesting.
Really interesting. And I thought, that's a way for... I won't make a comment about whether that's right or wrong, but I thought that's a way for a director to kind of shortcut, but also as a tool, I suppose, for a CEO as well, in terms of using AI, what kinds of questions or what kinds of gaps are a part of this paper.
Yeah, I mean, and I think, look, it's like if you're the CEO and you're going in, then you do need to understand what the board is. And if you don't know, I think that is part of that pre-meeting discussion that you should be having with your chair, which is, what do you want me to do with my board report? Like, do you want me to talk to it? Do you want me to do a summary? Do you want me, what do you want me to do? And I think getting in the habit of having that pre-meeting chat with your chair so that you're both in the same page as to what the board is looking for and how they hear the information, how you deliver the information, I should say. Because, they should have read the paper, and now are we opening up the floor for a discussion, or is there a particular issue that we need to make a decision on? And you and the chair should hopefully be on the same page about that. Like, the chair should be helping you, and you should be understanding how the chair wants to run the meeting, how they want to stick to the agenda, stick to the timelines, make the decisions.
But you also want to be able to be helping the chair too, right? Because, the chair's trying to keep... I mean, every board will run their agenda differently. It's important as the CEO to know how the chair does go through the agenda and how that agenda is actually structured. Everybody has it slightly different. And, is the chair a person who's very much about time? Is the chair very much around discussion or decision? But you also want to be helping your chair by using that pre-briefing of the board meeting in terms of these are things I'm going to be running through, or what do you need me, or what is the focus areas from the board's point of view that, you would really like me to emphasise. And by the way, we do obviously have another podcast episode which is about the board-chair relationship, which sort of gives more insight into that as well. But don't certainly go into your board meeting surprising your chair with information that you perhaps haven't summarised.
That would really annoy me as a chair. But I think it's about actually that would annoy you as a CEO if you're planning a meeting and someone comes in and says, oh, I'm just going to announce this. And you're like, you could have had that discussion with me before the meeting. Like, you should not be dropping bombs in a meeting. You should be, I would expect one of my senior exec to come in and go, oh my God, did you know this just happened? Or are you aware of this? Or that should be the conversation. It shouldn't be sort of something dropping unplanned in a meeting.
Or deferring something as well. I was talking with a CEO the other day actually, and they were sort of saying, I'm really trying to get this thing through the board and it's really important, and it had budget implications and things like that. And they reached out to me yesterday and I said, how did it go? And they said, well, we didn't get to it. I said, why? And they said, because the board meeting went over time. And so that item never got to, and it's been deferred to the next board meeting, which is in a quarter.
Wow, they only have quarterly board meetings.
Yeah, that's their particular cycle. And so they were sort of feeling quite frustrated that this important issue had been, or this important matter had now been deferred, and it had budget implications. And my first question was, did you have a conversation with your chair beforehand to highlight directly to the chair that it was important and the implications if the discussion did not happen? And they'd had it with other board members.
Well, especially if it's only quarterly, right? Because if you don't have it within your delegations to make that particular decision or incur that particular expense, and you do need board approval, then waiting for a quarter is a long time if you're not going to get to it. But I think, that kind of comes back to, I guess, originally understanding how the board works and also the agenda, like what else is on the agenda, because your board paper or your board report will be one item. Now, it may be that there's other items that you also do contribute to and you supply knowledge about. So I think it's really important to understand how the agenda runs, how the chair likes to run the agenda. And I think, how strictly time is kept. I mean, hopefully it is strict because there's nothing more annoying than a meeting going over. But also then I think that flows back to if your board report's been allocated X number of minutes, then you need to do your board report within X number of minutes. You actually also need to keep to time. You also need to be really cognizant of how the meeting is run. And if there is a big topic that we know needs a longer period of time, that you have that conversation with the chair beforehand, which is, okay, this is going to take up half an hour or this is going to take up X long. And at the end of that discussion, what do we want? Like, do I need a decision as a CEO, or is it just, if this is FYI and we're building strategic initiatives and this is a progress report, like what are you talking about and what are you requiring from the board at the end of that particular agenda item?
So that's really important in that board meeting preparation, isn't it? It's that knowing exactly what you're putting to the board, but equally what you're asking of the board, and being really clear about that. And it could just be I'm asking the board to note something. And then that pre-board briefing with the chair where you would be going through the agenda. And so you would be, depending on the agenda structure, my agenda structures have time allocations to it. So
I think that's a really good idea. I think it's hard initially to do that. I do think that is hard, but I think it is really worthwhile because it becomes quite clear where the meeting is blowing up. Now, this is the chair's responsibility, not the CEO's, but I do think it's where you start thinking about the meeting and your role in it. And so, you're not the chair, you're the CEO, but I think this is where you can start to work really closely with your chair and say, okay, what do I as the CEO need? And why am I putting all this information to the board. And because I think then you can start to make some sense around, okay, why is this blowing out? Why is this discussion going south? Why is this really good discussion? Like, I think you have to do a little bit of that analysis of the board meeting so that you understand from your perspective, if you want something as the CEO, like you want a decision, what can you do to get that decision?
And how long you have. So if there's, I don't know, let's say there's 15 minutes on the agenda. Each board meeting time frame is varied. Some do day, some do a couple of hours. So, but how much time you're actually given. So you've got to be really strategic as the CEO that if there's only a certain amount of time allocated to that agenda item that you're asking for a decision, it's not up to you as the CEO to take up all that time. There is going to be a point of time that is allowable for you to either talk to it or answer questions. But you've got to think about what are the points I've definitely got to get out in order for the decision to be made, and be really strategic in your use of what is available to you as the CEO in that available time on the agenda.
That's the hard part in some ways, isn't it? Because you have to go in and watch that discussion. Like, absolutely you contribute, but they have to be allowed to have their discussion. I think there's 2 points to that. One is that you hopefully already had a discussion with the chair about the topic or about the issue, so that they are aware, I guess, of your views or what you're asking for. And then you can also, I think the thing is for you not to sit there and go, oh, this is annoying, or I really want to say things, but I have to let other people speak. It's to just note who's saying what are the questions, where's the difficulty understanding, or where's the hesitation. That's really useful information for you to observe as the CEO, and then use that in your next presentation or discussion or ask. Like, really kind of be a bit investigative as well when you listen to those discussions.
And reflective. I've had an example where I had to put something to the board and I didn't expect I would get 100% agreement from each of the directors. And I remember sort of sitting down with like pen and paper and really reflecting on the issues or concerns director by director that would be potentially raised, and having almost like a table then about how I would actually address that, because it was a topic that was quite emotive, and really breaking down how I would respond to those particular concerns before I went into the board meeting. So it wasn't about me knowing the paper. I knew the paper. It was more important that I knew the kinds of responses and reactions that I was potentially going to observe, and then how I would also respond or contribute to that in order to get an outcome.
That also just made me think, like you will obviously also get questions that you don't know the answer to. And I think that is also really important to know how you're going to say, I don't know. Because there's nothing worse than someone in front of you fluffing away and, making out like they know when everyone knows.
Yes.
Oh my God. And everyone knows that they don't know, right? So I think it's okay to say, I don't know. It's okay to say, I don't know, I need to get back to you. Or actually, I know this, but I think the key piece of information I'm missing is this. Like, I think you have to have already worked out in your head what you're going to do when the answer is, I don't know.
Yeah, when you're a bit on the spot and you don't have it in hand. And it is okay to say, I will take that on notice and bring that back to the board, either at a meeting or follow up through an email, some level of communication. Boards are pretty forgiving about that.
I think they are, but my pet hate as well is, so-and-so didn't tell me, therefore I don't know. Like, it's the blame game, which is indicative of such a poor culture, And so I think one of the things is, when you're the CEO, in my view, you go in and you're the one that is answering for everything. So if some information hasn't been delivered to you, and it might be because an executive or another team member didn't deliver it, I would say that as a board member, it doesn't matter why the information isn't here. But if I'm on the board and my CEO says to me, oh, so-and-so didn't deliver that to me, I don't feel bad about so-and-so. I feel bad about the CEO. Like, I'd rather you said, look, sorry, we haven't got this information, and not blame someone. Like, to me, that's such a red flag and poor behaviour. So I think you go in with, as the CEO, it's your neck on the line. It's your responsibility to get the information. Now, if something's happened and one of the team members hasn't delivered rightly or wrongly, right? Like maybe there's a legitimate reason why they haven't or whatever. I think it's incumbent on you as the CEO to explain it in a way that's, we as the team are working on it. Or, I think you are the face of the organisation. And I also think how you handle that, especially if there's other executive in the room, that is really going to influence your own organisational culture and your relationships. So just be really cognizant of the I don't know and how you're responding, and also your demeanour, and making sure that you understand you're responsible, and the why is actually something that you need to manage with your team before and after. But in that boardroom, you should be having the conversation around, ultimately it is our responsibility to deliver, and we will get there. Like, we will do it, but you really need to think about that presentation as well.
Yeah, and I was thinking when you were talking, it's, one of the hard parts of being the CEO is that there's almost an unwritten expectation that you know everything about everything, but the reality is you can't know everything about everything. And that is obviously influenced or depends on how the size of your organisation and the complexity of your funding and regulation and the services that you deliver and your client base. So even though there is an expectation that if there's a questions asked for you that you can draw it in an instant, the likelihood of you knowing everything about everything is pretty low. And so it is reasonable to say, I'll take it on notice and I will come back to you and agree how you will come back to the board on it. I've never seen a board behave in a way where they would have sort of said, why don't you know that? It's not the why that's important. It's they've asked the question, the response is actually important to the question.
Yeah, I think it's going to depend on the relationship. And look, obviously, you aim to have a really cohesive and open relationship with your chair and all board members, but we know that humans are humans, and there may be instances where the board is maybe not as cohesive, or there's other politics going on, and you need to, I think, try very hard to not get caught up in the middle of it. But it might be that every now and then there's something thrown at you which may not happen in a more cohesive board, should we say. The other thing actually it just made me think is when the board requests of you for extra work or extra pieces of information, or one director says, oh, can we just know more about that or whatever, I don't think there's a universal answer, but I do think it's something to think about in terms of, your capacity, your team's capacity, managing expectations, timelines. And again, I don't think there's a right or wrong. Well, there's probably a wrong, which is, just no, or, but I think it's the discussion, right? It's the discussion on how you
manage those expectations. Yeah.
Exactly. How have you set up the expectation that, can directors just ring you, or does it go through the chair? Does the chair have to be in the loop? Like, I really think how you manage those questions and requests in the boardroom also is very important.
And, I think that is the hardest skill to develop as a new CEO as well, because you're in this position where obviously the board, that's your boss, and you've got anywhere from 5 to whatever directors that are your bosses, and they all, as we said earlier, have got their own, perspectives or bents or focus areas, and you want to also impress them and show them that you can do the job and those sorts of things. But managing the expectations and managing the capacity expectations as well is really super tricky. I was talking to a CEO a little while ago, and they said that was the piece that they struggled with the most. And so as the new CEO and a first-time CEO, every time the board asked something, they said yes, 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 yes. But it got to a point where they really honestly couldn't say yes anymore because any capacity had been quickly absorbed, and they left this organisation after a couple of years, and they felt that was the biggest regret and the biggest learning lesson that they had as a result was, I could have managed the capacity expectations with the board better because there was just ongoing demands coming from the board. And of course the board didn't sort of stop and reflect on that because in their mind the CEO is saying yes.
I think that's right. You have to set up those really clear expectations. When I was a CEO, actually, I used to, it would obviously depend on the relationship that you have with the chair, the relationship you have with the directors. And I mean, my golden rule is, first, I have to be in the loop. Now, it may be that there are certain topics or issues, and I'm sort of thinking more like finance, where it does make sense for certain board members to perhaps correspond directly with your finance director, but I still want to be in the loop. Whereas I think it's different if it comes to a new request, or you've walked out of a board meeting and someone wants more information about XYZ. And then I think you have to balance that everything goes through you are copied in on everything, because you don't want to be bottleneck if there's a good relationship and, the requests are reasonable, but you also do need to manage the requests if your team is already at capacity. And a lot of requests are valid and useful, but we know that sometimes there's a thought bubble in a boardroom and someone wants to do more and have more, and actually it's just off topic, or it's just not hitting the top 10 in the to-do list. And I think that's, you need to work with your chair.
I was going to say, your relationship with your chair is really, really critical. Absolutely. I feel like that's a lot in terms of how you show up in the boardroom. And there's now I think a whole other episode we can talk about in terms of what do you do post a board meeting.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think after the board meeting, because there's action items, they're mostly going to be attributed to you. Yeah, how do you deal with that? So I think
let's take that to another episode.
That'll be the next one. You mean we're back here next week?
That's right. We've delved a lot in the how do you show up in the boardroom. A lot of it was around obviously knowing your stuff, knowing your papers, being really clear about what are you asking the board to do, understand the board dynamics, the relationship, who you're in, who you are within that board meeting, because you're not in charge in that board meeting.
It's not your meeting.
Not your meeting, exactly. And then obviously your relationship with your chair and how you prepare, how your chair is prepared, how the chair is preparing you, how you're preparing them. And then that can take us smoothly next week into post-board meeting discussions.
All right, amazing. Well, see you in a week.